Okay, so any questions for me, anything? Or we can sort of just kind of jump in.
No, I don't think I have any questions. Is there any, are you going to throw me any hardballs? Any gotcha journalism here?
It'd be nice. No, I don't have anything like that prepared.
Hi, by the way, it's nice to meet you.
You as
Um,
well. It's always fun to talk to boss fight folks. These shows are always very popular without any fancy journalism.
good.
So cool. In that case, we'll just kind of roll into it. Sebastian, thanks for jumping on a call. Welcome. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Congrats, I should say, on Final Fantasy VI from Boss Fight Books. It's already got a number one, right?
Yeah, number one new release in music history and criticism on the Amazon.com Kindle store. So a lot of qualifiers on that, but still a number one. I'll take it.
You say that, but I'm guessing there's some pretty respectable titles on that list. I mean, they do get very specific on Amazon, and
That's true.
that's a solid category, I think.
That's true. Yeah, there are definitely some good books in there. One of which I like wrote my entry essay for grad school on. So feel good about
Ooh,
that. Beating that guy up, Alex Ross, New Yorker. It's great.
take that. Yeah. When did the book drop, by the way?
It must have been a week ago. Holy cow! I can't believe I can't like remember the exact date. Um,
Time goes
um,
quickly after launch, I know.
I know. Oh, how much can I curse on here? I should have asked in advance because I
Uh,
tend to swear like a sailor.
as much as you care to. We're
Okay,
marked
wonderful,
explicit everywhere, and we rarely put it to good use. So
beautiful. All
maybe
right,
you can
well,
help with that.
I will make good use of that. It was May 19th, so we're closing in on a month actually.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's cool. I mean, like book launch, I just experienced this for the first time. Also, like it happens, and it's just like thing after thing. Stuff starts really moving. You hear from people. You're trying to talk to different people and get stuff out there. And yeah, the days pass by quick. Like the first month, especially, goes by super fast.
yeah, and
So,
this was kind of peculiar in that it was a bit of a soft launch because the paperback isn't coming out until like July 13th, mid July
oh,
sometime. So it's only the ebook that's available right now, and
gotcha.
then the printers were apparently backed up, so there was a delay with that printing.
It's such a weird time for physical products of any kind because,
Yeah,
and I don't fully understand the whole scale of it, but if you need a physical component for what you're doing, it's like it's a real gamble right now.
yeah, I
So,
can I can imagine there's a backlog in a lot of places. It's still like impossible. I was just thinking about this. It's still like impossible to get a PlayStation 5.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and obviously they're not going to cram a bunch of factory workers in and make them make them try to churn them out really fast. But yeah, it is. It truly is for stuff a crazy time.
Yeah. Now, clearly, you're an established writer. I mean, is this uh, how many books have you? Is this the first book, or I know you're a writer?
Yeah, so this is actually my first published book.
Okay.
And I have just a few bylines. I think uh, most of my writing, I didn't, it's actually funny. I didn't really start writing until I applied to grad school. So I was a professional musician in my
Mhm.
20s. I did opera and classical concert singing,
Nice.
and I it wasn't until I moved to New York in about 2009 I started dabbling in writing, and I met my husband in early 2010, like just a few months after I got here, and he was a sketch writer at Upright Citizens Brigade.
Oh
So
wow.
he had a weekly show there,
Nice.
and uh, he obviously knew a lot of other writers, a lot of comedy folks, and they really encouraged me with my own writing. I was putting stuff out on Tumblr, and they were like, "Hey, this is really great." So I was like, well, I have a few friends who went into MFA programs. Maybe I'll give that a shot as well. And so I was working at Columbia at the time, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to apply to Columbia because I get tuition remission. I'll see if I get in, and then if I don't get in, I'll go from there. Maybe I'll apply next year to other programs. And I just happened to get in. It was wild. I did not expect it because Columbia is pretty competitive. I
Sure.
learned after the fact. I did not know that going in. And so when I tell my friends that who are in the program, they want to strangle me because a lot of them had been applying to other programs for years. And this was, they finally got into this one. They just wanted to murder me. So, so it wasn't until like 2013 that I really started taking writing seriously. So I have my master's thesis, which is a book length manuscript of essays and experimental prose. It's very weird. It has, as many agents have told me, no commercial value. So I imagine it'll never be published. But this is my first book. I've done a little bit of TV criticism and a little bit of essay writing. And that's really it. Yeah, it's crazy that I got this. This was kind of the same thing as grad school. I just kind of applied right after I graduated. I threw this pitch at Boss Fight and they bit. And again, not a thing that I was expecting. I was just like, all right, buckle up. I'm gonna write a book. And here we are. So
what a nice story, though, to make a bunch of new friends who, encourage you with that. And then it really takes off. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, it really was. I really owe them a lot. I really do. Yeah.
And was the transition to New York from St. Louis? You mentioned you were a fellow St. Louisan at one time.
Oh, yeah. No, that was involuntary. So I used to work for COCA, the Center of Creative Arts in University City in St. Louis County, for those of us who are non-St. Louisans. And, it's a small arts organization. So in the 2008 recession, I lost my job. So I was unemployed for like the first 9 months of 2009. And I took the first job that I could get. And it happened to be like as a billing paralegal for a law firm here in New York. So I was like, all right, got 2 weeks. I'm going to pack up what I can, move to New York. It was crazy. But I'm glad I did it. A lot of cool stuff has happened to me since. So, yeah.
And I feel like even if you said Coca to a lot of St. Louisans, probably half wouldn't know what you were talking about. I happen to. I think at one time they were one of the only places around here who did like improv. You could catch a class or a thing, once a week. And I never ended up doing it, but it was one of the places I looked at when I was thinking about it at one time. So I randomly came across this and had a couple of friends who knew about it. But it was kind of a cool setup they've got here, and it's one of the things that makes St. Louis nice. But it's always nice to run into people who are creating things and doing things from this area, whether they're still here or not. So good for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, the book is Final Fantasy VI, and clearly this game has meaning to you because you made a pitch based on it, which was accepted, which are both noteworthy elements to that. Why Final Fantasy VI?
Well, I fell in love with this game pretty much from the instant I turned the cartridge on. And it goes back, my love for Final Fantasy extends to the NES game, the first Final Fantasy game. When I was a kid, I was just, there was something about it that really caught my imagination. And I didn't even own it. My best friend's brother owned the game, and I kept borrowing it from him over and over and over again. And that game was set up such that you can only have one save data on it.
Oh, yeah.
And the only way you can like stay at an inn to like recover all of your hit HP and MP is to save. You have to save every time you do that. So I used to borrow it from him and then just play until I died over and over and over again. And then I finally convinced him to let me play through it. And it was really just such a formative experience for me that really kicked off a love, not just for Final Fantasy, but for fantasy in general. But to me, there was something really beautiful I found as a kid to that idea of those four classic elements. That was my like intro to earth, wind, fire, and water. And I used to think about like what made up each thing in my house. Like, what was my bed made of? It was like, okay, it was earth because it was wood, but also like air because there was air in the mattress, like that kind of stuff. I used to think about that a lot. And like, like what was metal? What did that count as, obviously like earth. Now I realize, but as a kid, I didn't. So I really, really loved that game. And then I found out about Final Fantasy II. A family friend dumped a bunch of old Nintendo Power magazines on us. Nice. And one had like a spread on Final Fantasy II, and that's how I found out about it. So started renting that from Blockbuster Video, and ran up so many late fees with it. I used to just like rent it, and we got late fees, and we used to re-rent it over and over and over again because I loved playing it, not just playing through to the end, but just like replaying over and over and over and doing the grind and all of that. It was just so much fun for me. And it got to a point where my parents were like, all right, we are reaching a point at which these late fees are murdering us. So it will be less expensive to actually buy Sebastian the game. And that's what we're going to do. So one day my dad made this trek to Nintendo, or not to Nintendo, to Toys R Us to buy the game for me. And I kind of knew that he left. It was kind of supposed to be a surprise, but like I kind of knew what was happening. I knew what was going on. It wasn't my birthday. It wasn't like Christmas or anything. And I grew up like with not a lot of money. So this kind of thing did not happen. So this was like a big deal. And my dad came back and he was like, listen, I was going to get you Final Fantasy II. They didn't have it at Toys R Us. So I got you this instead. And he pulled Final Fantasy III out of the bag. And I had, I didn't have a subscription to Nintendo Power. I just had all those old issues. So I had no idea that there was even a Final Fantasy III. And it just happened to be after the release date. And it just happened that there was a guy who worked at Toys R Us who was like, get this for your kid. It's great. And yeah, so I flipped it on, and I like, as soon as I saw those Magitech armor mech suits walking over the tundra with that music underneath, I was just like, I remember like I gasped with my hand over my mouth. There was something so spectacular about that. At the time, it was like bending the technology to the limit, and the music was so beautiful, and it was so wonderful. I just fell in love right there and then.
I mean, what a nice introduction to a game, that's really cool because I have a weirdly similar story about Toys R Us for some reason. I don't know if a lot of kids in a certain age range come away with something like this, but we were in a similar situation. I was a kid obsessed with my Nintendo, and most of my games came from like yard sales, or maybe the occasional cousin was throwing something out or something.
And so, familiar, yeah.
Right, a lot of secondhand stuff, which I was thrilled to get. Totally happy about that. But we made one special trip to Toys R Us together, me and both my parents at that time. And when we got there, I think my dad saw that Pac-Man was like ported to the NES and sort of took over the trip, and we left with Pac-Man instead of like one of many, many things I had in mind. We ended up with, like, he talked me, and it wasn't like, I know you want this, but we're getting this, but he kind of talked me into it, which was fine. I liked Pac-Man well enough, but it's funny because it stands out as the only time I think we went to Toys R Us and got a new game out of the case. And I feel like we kind of like blew it on Pac-Man,
Yeah. I mean, it's not a bad game, but like an interesting choice for the NES.
It didn't exactly showcase the technology. Which my dad knew nothing about, but that's funny anyway. Should we kind of sort out the weird release versions of Final Fantasy for anybody not familiar with that? Now we've called this 3 and 6 already.
Yeah. So The first Final Fantasy game was released in both Nintendo and Japan. Uh, in Japan, they developed Final Fantasy 2 and 3 for the NES, and they were actually very close to to bringing the second game over to the US. But I guess the localization folks, they had already started a translation, I think, and maybe even were very close to finishing it. I think there's like a test cartridge floating around out there. But they decided it was the story was too weird for America, because like there's like a gateway to hell or something in Final Fantasy 2. It gets weird. It's a little weird in comparison to the first one. So they decided no, and then Final Fantasy 3 for the NES had this weird job system, so it was too complicated. So they were going to they brought Final Fantasy 4, the first Final Fantasy for the Super Nintendo, over to the NES because it was a little more of a traditional kind of story that was easy, like sort of like cross-culturally easy to like understand. But they couldn't call it Final Fantasy 4 because everyone would be like, what happened in 2 and 3, buddy? Like, where are my other games? So they called it Final Fantasy 2. And then the same thing happened with Final Fantasy 5. They didn't bring it over. Again, there's this very complex job system in that game as well. So they brought Final Fantasy 6 over and called it Final Fantasy 3. And then they skipped straight to 7. They were unapologetic about that. When they went to the PlayStation, they were just like, oh, forget it. And then from 7 on, it's been consistent between the US and Japan.
Yeah, so hopefully, I mean, that's already in itself also a little bit complicated, but hopefully that straightens it out for anyone who didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because I guess I was certainly past childhood when I found out that they were a little bit hit and miss on the releases. So, but at the same time, like if you weren't around at the time or you just didn't know about it, like my recollection was there was kind of this weird, like, a lot of traditional American families were really unsure about Nintendo stuff in general because, it sounds like Nintendo was being paranoid. They really weren't. There was this weird sort of like, what is this? I don't know. Some of these games are about magic and the devil and stuff.
Yeah.
And my family wasn't particularly out there, but for some reason the line from my mom was when they put out, like, I think during the Nintendo time, they came up with the "Now You're Playing with Power" slogan, and when they hit that again for the Super Nintendo, and now you're playing with superpower or whatever, my mom was like, I've had enough. You're not it's very strange. We never got a Super Nintendo because she decided this was going in a weird direction. I can think of one other friend who had a similar story, like, I don't know what they're trying to get you kids into, and it was the most mundane, harmless stuff.
Yeah.
There are no super weird Nintendo games at all. But that's funny.
So funny. That's so funny. Yeah.
I'm not a complete casual with the Final Fantasy series, but I guess I am to some degree because my big ones were like Final Fantasy 7. I played most of. I don't think I finished 8, but I played quite a bit of 8.
I don't blame you for not finishing.
It's a big job, and then like Crystal Chronicles later on, and friends, like you said, friends always have different ones, and you check them out with friends and play as much of it as you can during a summer afternoon or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I've always been a fan, but I'm well under half of the games played. But are you keeping up with the series overall, or?
I'm actually like, I'm gonna like, you're going to have to revoke my Final Fantasy card now. I actually have not played most of them past 7. I started 8 and I gave up. And I think that's a common theme for folks who have played Final Fantasy 8 from what I'm learning.
Yeah.
After 8, I was, I think, headed into college, and I never had a PlayStation, and I never had, like a PS2 or anything. So I kind of fell off with the Final Fantasy games because my computer, when they ported them over to PC, my computer was never powerful enough to handle them. So 8 was as far as I could go. And then suddenly I was in college, and I had so little time for video games that like all I did was like play old ones to relax myself and like chill before I went to bed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I actually, to be honest, I'm not sure if I finished 7. I've seen 7 finished. I probably was like around hanging out with a friend when they finished, but I don't know if I finished it myself, to be honest. Yeah.
7 was kind of so ubiquitous that, even those of us who didn't finish our own playthrough got to see a friend, polish it off, or, certainly we all kind of know what happens.
Yeah.
But there's my gotcha journalism. Boss fight author doesn't play Final Fantasy.
I will, but you know what? I will say I went back and I played 2, 3, and 5. So I've got that, or 2 and 5. I never played through 3. I didn't get it. I'm glad they didn't port it to the US when I was a kid, because I would have given up. But yeah, I played 2 and 5. So I can at least say I went back and did that.
So that's quite a bit of credit I have to give you right there. So you're further along than me. What makes your book very unique in the boss fight series, as far as I know, is its big emphasis on music. And obviously you have a ton of musical expertise, but this book is largely a walkthrough of, its reflections on the music of the game from a musical expert such as yourself. So, I mean, is that largely the focus of the entire thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I pitched it, for sure. I would, like I mentioned, the music is one of the things that really got me. And I love the music from Final Fantasy 4, and even from the original on the NES. And, like when the internet happened, I discovered the music from 2 and 3 for the NES. And God, Final Fantasy 2 for the NES has some really, really wonderful music. I'm really sad, actually, that game never made it to the US, because, oh my God, there's some good stuff in there. But yeah, I pitched it as sort of a look at the game through the music, and how the music functions within the game to advance the drama, and to hold the game together, because the script is a disaster. It's a train wreck. I mean, there's so much going on that you can it's hanging by a thread, right? The story, because there's so many characters. They wrote it specifically so that there's no main characters, and there are 14 quote unquote main characters, and they all have their own weird backstories that you discover as you're going. And then, once you get halfway through, it turns into this open world game where you just kind of figure things out on your own. And the music, I think, is one of the things that really helps tell the story. Even if you were to take away some of the flashbacks, where the stories of the characters' backstories really happen in flashbacks, you don't really see them play out in real time. If you sort of took those away from the game, the music would still do a lot of the work needed to make the characters really vivid and memorable. So, I mean, I don't go into all that necessarily word for word in the book, but yeah, the music is really, I think, one of the most important, if not the most important element of that game. Yeah.
There's even in points, there's actual sheet music in to describe look at this, these bars and these chords and stuff. It's very I wouldn't discourage somebody who wasn't a musical expert to read it, because it certainly goes plenty far to explain the concepts to anybody who might not be knowledgeable on that. But it's fascinating to sort of take this approach, and it sounds like there was plenty to work with. I mean, were these things that you had thought about before you decided to kind of do this pitch? Was there a time when you were I could really dig into this music if only I had the right outlet?
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, first of all, for folks who are not musical experts, we included little musical excerpts in musical, we call them figures, in the book. Mostly for folks who don't read music, you can kind of still see the shapes of the melodies, and hopefully like the notes are spaced out enough that you can kind of get a sense of the rhythm. But yeah, they're mostly there for folks who can read music, and hopefully they inspire you to, pick up the soundtrack and, see if you can read along and make sense of where these little things go. But in terms of like my desire to write this book, I, like listen to the soundtrack over and over and over. And I could almost recite it for you. But I never really thought about writing a book about it until I was in grad school. And it was my last semester. I was doing a research seminar to fulfill a requirement for graduation. And because it was my last semester and I was just like, it had been so hard. I was doing this program while I was working full time. And I decided, I'm going to be wrapping up my thesis while I'm doing this research seminar. I was like, I want to do something fun. So I decided I was going to research video game music and write about video game music because I'd taken criticism, criticism as literature as a class before this. And I really was coming out of the program focusing on literature, so on criticism. So I decided to do video game music. And this felt like the logical place for me to start because it was the music that I knew best. And I had already read, there's a 33 1/3 book by Andrew Schartman on the music from Super Mario Brothers. For folks who aren't familiar, the 33 1/3 series is very similar to Boss Fight, except instead of, diving into one video game per book, they dive into one album per book. And Andrew Schartman's book was, unique to that series in that it dove into a video game rather than diving into an album. So it was kind of the converse of or inverse of my book in the Boss Fight series. So I'd read that before and I was like, well, I know this is possible. Like, I know you can write about this in a critical way and explore it in a really meaningful, interesting way. And that's kind of like why I went into writing about video game music in this seminar, aside from the fact that I just thought it would be fun. So I researched Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and how they made it to the concert stage. There's a little bit of that in the book about live concerts. But my sort of idea was like, I want to figure out like, how did it make the leap, right, from the screen to the stage? And that's sort of what my little paper was on. We didn't have to write like a full, like 10 or like 40 page, thesis on it. But I took a little 5-page excerpt of that. And that's actually what I used to pitch this book to Gabe and Mike, the editors at Boss Fight, because a friend tipped me off that they were accepting pitches for Final Fantasy VI, and I was like, holy cow, holy shit, making use of that explicit rating.
Thank you.
I was like, holy shit, I researched this in grad school. I got it. This is perfect. I'm going to try it. I'm going to see if I can get a book deal right out of grad school. Like one of those assholes who gets a book deal right out of grad school. Yeah. So I sent him the piece that I had written for that research seminar. And I said, I think I can do Final Fantasy VI for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I wrote probably 500 words in this email to say, why I thought I could do it. And he called me out of the blue one. Gabe, the editor at Boss Fight, called me out of the blue and said, talk to me about this. Why this book? And, I kind of gave him the same talk that I just gave here, but, I explained that this was kind of a turning point in game music. I think this is one of the games where people really started to think about game music as music rather than just as something that accompanied something you played, something you really wanted to listen to after the game was over. So I didn't when I was a kid, I wasn't dreaming of writing this book, but it just happened that all of this stuff kind of came together all at once. It was really a wonderful coincidence.
and I'm sure Gabe looked at this as what a fantastic way to get a Final Fantasy book done, because I have no doubt that many people have probably pitched parts of the series, and the disconnect, I think, there is probably that interviews are difficult to do because it is indeed a JRPG, J being Japanese, and there are some challenges there. So but from the musical look at the series, and for such a book with such, or a game with such great music, it's really seems like a win for everybody. And I'm a very slow reader, so I wish I had the book complete, but I've definitely got a good start on it, and I've skipped around, and I'm really having fun looking at it. So I think it's another win for them. So
good, thanks. Yeah, I was terrified to write this book, frankly, because so many people love this series, so many people love this book, that like going into it, I was like, okay, I have this angle at least that I'm going into the book with, but I don't know if I don't know if am I going to do it justice, or people are going to be mad at me because I didn't write the book that they were looking for. Like, oh my God, I'm terrified of this. So I'm really, really glad you like it. That means a lot.
Totally. And I think readers of the Boss Fight series, and we talk about it on the podcast pretty regularly, so I feel comfortable, spending time discussing that. But like, there's a lot of variation, and I think people have come to appreciate that. There's obviously stuff like NBA Jam, which could not have been any more thoroughly researched, which is a feat of writing from Rayan Ali, who's been on the show a couple of times now. And then there are others that are very personal in nature, like Chrono Trigger comes to mind. A lot of great information in that one too, but also a very personal story, which was also very fun to read about. So
it was,
this seems like a fantastic blend of, fairly technical writing and plenty of personality and emotion in there, just through the inherent nature of discussing music. And God, you're such an educated guy. Like, you've also got a bunch of expertise in, what was it, French literature?
Yeah. My undergrad. So I was a professional opera singer, but my undergraduate degree was actually in French literature. And I mostly studied 18th century dramas.
My God.
And I don't have a completed manuscript for this, but I'm also working on a translation project of 16th century poems written by a blind nun. She wrote a cycle of 587, like poems based on the liturgical calendar. And I'm not a religious guy, but like, I just found this collection. I was like, this is really interesting. So I'm giving a stab at translating something from Middle French, which I did not study Middle French in college. So this is like a little tricky for me, but yeah, my interests are kind of all over the place. And so, I think that's kind of one of the reasons that this book was fun for me, because it was the collision of video games and music, two of my passions. So,
yeah, and translations literally the Lord's work. So.
Yes, quite literally.
I kind of want to dig into the musical performance element of it too. I mean, that's a pretty fantastic thing to get to do for a while. That you said that was mostly during college years or later college years?
It was, so I had a regular gig singing in a church. Again, not a religious guy. I feel like I have to like say that because like I don't know.
That makes it interesting.
Yeah. I sang in a church for 7 years, starting when I was a sophomore in college. And it was like, like every Thursday and Sunday, they paid me to go sing. It was like getting paid to breathe for me. It was literally getting paid to breathe, because that's what true. Singing is.
Fair
it's
enough.
Just breathing in a very specific way. But and then after college, I started doing opera and concert singing. I did not have a very illustrious career. I sang in some opera choruses. I did some performances. The big thing that I did was perform the Fauré Requiem in with a pickup orchestra and a chorus in a church. I sang the baritone solo, and that's one of my favorite pieces. And so it was really an honor to be able to sing it. And then I sang with the St. Louis Symphony Chorus. So that was another regular gig.
Nice.
As well. So yeah, I didn't do I never made it to the stage at the Met. And one of the reasons I stopped singing is because I have like just debilitating stage fright. And so at a certain point, like I had a church gig after I moved to New York as well. But at a certain point, it became, like I had to do the mental calculus, like, what am I getting out of this versus what am I giving to this, from a mental health standpoint? And, unfortunately, I had to step away from it. But yeah, I still hope one day that I'll be able to get back on that stage.
Yeah. It's funny because my wife and I were both trained in various musical performance from very early ages, and both did paid musical jobs for churches. Not that we were never religious. We were both brought up in that sort of environment, but we both did like musical jobs longer than we were like actively participating in church otherwise.
Oh, that's so funny.
I would say so.
What do you play? Now I want to know all about this.
And I feel bad for folks who tuned in last time because I didn't realize initially I was going to speak with like two musical experts in a row. The last was Adam Fligston from Silent Audio, who's a fantastic composer. And but I played concert percussion instruments from like age 10 till we performed at Carnegie Hall my senior year of high school. And then that was kind of a going away for me because I was going off to tech school where I did like programming. So,
end on a high note. You're going to end at Carnegie, I
told people like, I'm not going to do it in college, but what would I do after this, Right. So it's very cool. And my wife learned piano at like age 6, and she's a fantastic pianist. So
cool. That's awesome.
It's a musical house, and now our son's getting into it too. So I love hearing from people who do stuff like this because you know that even not being a part of the religious thing that's going on there, just they have beautiful music, and it's a fun experience, and the performance element is cool when it obviously stage discomfort is a big problem for that, but otherwise, I mean, collaborative musical performance is very fun, and it's a very unique experience. I tell people, nothing like it.
It's really one of the most rewarding things. It's such a great way to bond with people and connect with people. After I moved to New York, I sang college a cappella, first of all. Don't hold it against. Some people really love a cappella. Some people really hate it. I have earned the right to hate it after having sung it for 4 years. But I sang with a group when I was in college, and they ended up being some of my best friends. And after I moved to New York, a couple of folks that I sang with are here, and we formed a quartet. Like we would get together. We didn't perform anywhere. We just like got together once a month and sat around and ate cheese and crackers and sang. Nice. And it was just so fun. We did it for a year and a half until folks started moving away. But yeah, it's such a great way to connect with people. And that was such a fun, like social idea. Like, don't go to a movie, don't go to dinner, like come over and sing. Great. It was super fun.
It's funny how that stuff comes back up, because long after we had sort of given that stuff up around here, we have musical instruments, of course, but we don't do a ton with them because our jobs don't involve music. But my wife went into healthcare, and sure enough, the hospital she worked at, she came to me one time and she goes, "This is weird. My boss is looking for a drummer." And what that turned into was like had kind of formed a band, several people at the hospital, like new instruments and stuff. And they're like, "We're looking to play around at parties and stuff." And sure enough, I spent a couple of years playing music with people from her work, and it was lovely. Lovely people. So we had a great time. And so I say pick up an instrument for anybody thinking about it. You never know when it's going to come up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. And if you've got kids, let them take piano lessons or violin lessons or whatever piques their interest. If they're at all interested in music and if you have the money for it, let them play, find a way to let them play, because it's so rewarding and they will thank you when they are adults.
And that's exactly what we came away with last week was no matter what you're interested in, start with piano, just because you learn the theory and all the stuff, and the practice is, tough but not excruciating. And these days, I'm sure YouTube can teach it to you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you'll come so much farther, so much faster than we would have as kids,
Yeah. I can't play the piano. I actually I took one semester of remedial piano when I was in college. And I always wanted to take piano lessons when I was a kid. I mentioned we didn't have a lot of money. We definitely did not have the money for piano lessons. So I kind of tinkered on one and played by ear. We just had like this ancient one. Someone gave us a piano, I guess before I was born. And we never had it tuned. It was broken. One time my brother stuffed me inside of it and a bunch of the hammers broke.
My God.
Yeah, that's a whole story in and of itself. But yeah, I just kind of played by ear. I never was able to take lessons. And it's such a big regret of mine. I so wish I could play. And one of these days, maybe I will get myself a nice keyboard and teach myself from YouTube or take some lessons.
No reason we shouldn't take advantage of the easy way now too,
Right.
So, sort of getting back to the book, what was the writing process like? How long did this take you? Are you sick of the game yet? Tell me.
This is hilarious. It took me 5 years, and that's way too long. It should not have taken me 5 years. So I started the research right when I pitched the book, right when I signed the contract for the book. I actually got a new job. I quit my job at Columbia and I got a new job writing for Planned Parenthood. I work in their national offices. So I work for Planned Parenthood. I started there right before the 2016 elections, and then Trump got elected. And there I was writing for Planned Parenthood, helping them raise money. And my life just crashed. It was so insane to work there during the Trump presidency. So we never knew what was going to happen next. And so sometimes I just had to email Gabe and Mike and be like, sorry, guys, I cannot write right now. I have, Ruth Bader Ginsburg just died. So, So it was a very tumultuous job. I also have bipolar 2 disorder. And so coping with that while writing and having this crazy job was a challenge in and of itself. And so the research process took quite a long time because I did want to make sure that that I wasn't going into this blind. I read a lot of scholarship, not just on the game, but on video game music in general.
Sure.
And that took about, 8 months to a year before I felt comfortable really digging into the writing. And then after that, it was just sort of battling with my personal life. When can I fit this in? How much can I get done? What, and Gabe and Mike are busy too. And so it was working around their schedule, and, it took way longer than it should have, but pleased with the result. I came away I don't know if I'm ever going to write another book, or at least not another researched book. But I might, but this one was an arduous process. It was really a grind for me. But I think that's kind of the case for everyone. I don't think writing a book is easy for anyone. I think everyone, when they're done, they're like, I'm never writing another book. And then they change their minds. So yeah, it took a long, long time. And this was a game that the Kickstarter backers chose to do. And so I was always worried while I was writing. I was like, ooh, people are waiting on this. People are waiting on this. And I was also like, I'm writing on this famous, really well-known game and people love, am I going to screw it up? And I had this extra, I don't know, I had this extra worry as someone who minored in music in college. I was so worried about musicologists and how it would be received among musicologists. And I don't know, there was a lot of anxiety, going into this, and, mental illness, like anxiety, doesn't mesh well together. So it really, really took a long time. There were a lot of factors at play. A lot
Yeah,
of
no,
factors
that
at play.
makes total sense. And I don't know if I just have maybe a better look at this than the average reader might because I've spoken to several boss fight authors now, but there's almost always, and authors in general, really, there's almost always a version of that story where it's like, this was really maybe 2 years worth of work and it took me 5, 6 years. That's a super common story because really when we're coming up with that year or two number in our minds, we're seeing ourselves in this situation that never happens. You're in this pristine office and you have all day to work on it and everything's nothing's going on wrong at home. No, your neighbor isn't making noise and your family isn't upset with you for some weird reason. And I've heard this from many people and I definitely experienced it myself. It's we don't really think of things. We don't estimate according to the worst case scenario. We estimate according to the perfect scenario, which never happens.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Books take a long time to write. Always, I think. So
definitely learned that. So I'm glad I'm not alone. That makes me feel a lot better, actually. Glad I'm not.
Yeah, if that helps. I've never spoken to anyone who was like 4 months and then it was done. It's never happened.
If only.
My, I didn't interview books, so everybody really, other people wrote the book for me by speaking the things, and I just copied them down. But if you really looked at how long it took, it was 3 or 4 years because I did those interviews over the course of several years. So it never goes quickly, but I mean that makes sense. And if you still think of the game positively, then that's great. I mean, I hope.
I still love the game. I still love the game, and I'm kicking around the idea of playing through it. I really want to make my husband play through it, but I don't know if I can make him. He never played video games growing up. He was a comic book guy.
Oh, well, there you go.
So yeah, I'm wondering if I can get him to sit down for 40 hours to play through this game. Who knows?
It's a big ask. Yes. What are his big comic books? Just out of curiosity.
He's really into Marvel stuff.
Nice.
He has 5,500 comic books. He really is into comic books. His name is Brett White. He did a podcast called Matt and Brett Love Comics. I don't know how many people listen to it, but I want to plug that. They don't do it anymore, but you can go back and listen to the episodes still. They're evergreen. It was really great podcast. And yeah, he's really into Marvel. He writes now. He's a TV critic for Decider.com, and he writes about all of the Marvel TV stuff that's coming out. He has to wake up really early he woke up really early yesterday to watch Loki and had to write a big thing about it. So yeah, he's really into comic books. I'm surprised he's not sick of them. The way one might be sick of Final Fantasy VI after writing about it.
You want to talk about things working out well for you. Being a kid who was into Marvel, now Marvel was doing well decades ago also. Yeah. But what a time to be a Marvel expert, right?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, professionally and just like from an audience standpoint.
Oh yeah.
Holy cow. Like, I feel bad for folks who really, really love DC because DC movies, they can't seem to nail it. Like,
right.
They have hits every now and then, but they just can't seem to keep the momentum up. I feel really bad for them. I would love to see that happen though. But yeah, he's very staunchly a Marvel guy. He loves the X-Men.
Well, they are certainly on top. So it's a great time. Just off the top of my head, I mean, if Final Fantasy VI, let's say it had been taken in the series already, the timing wasn't right. Somebody got to it. And you still ended up doing this. Do you think you'd end up doing a boss fight book? And what might have been the book?
So if I had to do another boss fight book, I think I would still have to explore it from a music angle because that's really how I see everything. When I'm talking about movies, I kind of talk about the music first before, like TV shows, not so much, but like, when I talk about movies, I really think about the music first. And I'm always like, when they play like a piece of classical music in a movie, I always like lean over to Brett and I'm like, that's Mozart. That's Bach. That's Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
Um, but if I had to write another boss fight book, I would probably write it about Super Mario RPG.
Oh yeah,
I
nice.
think that's a really interesting um, intersection of game and music and concept
Yeah.
and universes like colliding. And the music was written by Yoko Shimomura, who also did the Kingdom Hearts games.
Hmm.
And uh, she's wonderful, and I'm really really curious to know from her how she managed to write such a great score for this really really Super Mario RPG is another game that should not have worked.
Hmm.
It truly shouldn't have worked. And I think, again, the music is part of the reason it did. I don't think it's necessarily as big of a factor as with Final Fantasy VI, but um, I want to know like how she walked that tightrope to get like the RPG feel and the Mario feel and sort of like mash them together. And
Yeah.
I'm also really curious to know about her experience as a woman working in the games industry, but also working as a composer in the games industry in the 90s.
Yeah.
Because there are not many women composers whose works, have survived or made it into the classical canon. And, video games became a very male dominated field very early on. And obviously music already was. So it's like a double whammy. And here comes Yoko Shimomura, a genius. And I just want to know like what that experience was like for her. I'm so curious. And if anyone is listening to this who knows of any writing on that subject already, please hit me up. I would love
Yeah.
to read it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. That was such a fantastic game. Fantastic music. But I remember I've gone back to that game several times. It's another one I haven't finished, but
Mm,
it's a game I love starting, which is,
yeah,
I don't know if that's a thing.
totally valid. Totally valid.
I've started that game at least 6, 7 times that I can think of, and I sit there playing this game, and it's one of those things you almost look around the room like, is anyone seeing this? Like, who
Yeah.
else? Who has missed this that I can bother? Like, go play. I can't believe how fun that game is.
It's so much fun. It really is. My God, I love it so much. That's another one I just love. I love it. It makes me smile.
That'd be a great candidate for a remake, if you ask me. That would be.
You
I don't know
know,
if that would be the best thing or the worst thing. I don't know.
yeah, I would be really interested to see that, to be honest. I'm not always a fan of just like remaking games for the sake of remaking them, but that one feels like something really cool could happen. Um, yeah, yeah.
I would be. I would be a big fan of that. So I tell you, as time runs short here, what do you think? What do you think is up next for you?
I'm gonna sort of ride the wave of this book a little bit, see where it takes me, see how folks are thinking about it, and what I learn from people after having this published, and sort of like the feedback I get, and sort of take that and digest it and see sort of what that leads me to. I think it's pretty clear by this point that I'm not very big on life plans. Just sort of like falling into a book, falling into grad school, falling into moving to New York. Um, so so yeah, I'm gonna see where things take me. I would love to finish this translation project I'm working on, and I would love to polish up my grad school thesis, my essays, and my weird, stupid experimental prose, and maybe see if it does in fact have commercial value, even though several people have already told me it doesn't. Uh, yeah. So yeah, just because those are the projects I have on deck. I also would love to make a video game. I would love to make a JRPG.
Nice.
I actually have a great idea for one, but I'm not going to spill the beans on the air. But I would absolutely love to make a game. That would be a dream. So
I mean, this is the time for experimental content. I mean, you don't need anyone's permission these days. You
yeah,
just get to do it. So take a run at it. I think that would be awesome, and absolutely run with the game idea. I can't wait to hear more about that. So that'll be
yeah,
great.
yes, yeah. I'd love to do that.
Well, let people know where they can find you online, the book, and anything else they should know.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Sebsational. That's SEB as in boy, Sebsational, sensational, Sebsational. Uh, you can find me on Instagram. Same thing. My Instagram is not very fun, but honestly, my Twitter's not very fun either. Big shit poster. Um, and you can find the book on bossfightbooks.com. The ebook is $5. So, you're not going to lose a lot. It's not a huge investment. Hopefully you will invest and get a lot of return on it. And you can also find it on the Kindle store. A paperback is going to be coming out mid-July, around July 13th, give or take. So yeah,
Nice.
that's the scoop.
So a very low risk investment. Final Fantasy VI from Boss Fight Books. Congrats on it again, and we'll look
Thank you
forward
so
to seeing
much.
what's next from you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It's been great to speak to you.
Likewise.